All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. It is Friday, June 5th, and our topic of discussion today and going into next week is going to be current events. And even more specifically, we're going to try to figure out today why are there protests and riots in the United States right now? Now, in your Google Classroom, there is a Google form that I'd like you guys to take a look at. There's a series of questions here that you can answer, or you can pose questions, whatever you guys think is best. It's just anything that you want to share about what you already know about the events of the last week. So take a minute to do that, and then we'll get started. All right, then let's get into it. So, first of all, there have been more than 400 protests, vigils, or memorial services across the United States in the last week. There's even been a significant number of international events taking place in countries like England, Brazil, New Zealand, Japan, Iran, and South Africa, just to name a few international locations. The protests have taken a number of different forms. You can watch in this video and see some of the different protests that have taken place across the United States. They range from being nonviolent marches to even rioting and skirmishes with law enforcement and police. The question that we're going to try to answer today is why? Why are the protests happening at all? Why is there support for the movement behind the protests? And then we're going to try to also answer the sensitive question, why do some of these protests become violent? We're going to try to do all of that today. It's a sensitive topic. Bear with me. At the end of this, I promise you will have an opportunity to share your ideas and thoughts and questions or concerns as we go forward. So first, recent events have spurred these protests. Before we talk about those recent events, the most recent events, we have to consider the impact of the coronavirus. You all know that the threat of widespread COVID-19 infections has forced a number of states, cities, and localities to implement restrictions on where people can go and who can go to work, for example. As a result, we've got more people in the United States following current events that are turned into social media. More significantly, though, for these protests, is that the coronavirus has had a disproportionate effect on Black people and other minorities. In New York City, for example, Black people are more likely to be infected with COVID-19, be hospitalized from the virus, and die as a result of the sickness. Why? It's in part because of racial divisions in the United States. Like, for example, in 2016, according to the United States Census, the typical net worth of a white family was found to be nearly 10 times greater than that of a Black family. Compared with white Americans, African Americans are almost twice as likely not to have medical insurance. Furthermore, in terms of jobs, African Americans are more likely to work in the service industry jobs and have to live in densely populated areas. Both are conditions that have led to the spread of COVID-19 in their communities. But basically, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted racial divisions in the United States with regard specifically to healthcare and income inequality, for example. Additionally, the last few months, there have been several high-profile cases where Black people were unjustly killed. In February, Ahmaud Arbery, this gentleman here, was killed in the style of like an old Jim Crow murder. Two white men saw Arbery on a jog in Georgia. They were suspicious to see a Black man in their neighborhood and automatically suspected him to be a burglar. They armed themselves, chased Arbery down, they confronted him, and then when he tried to run away, they shot him in the back, killing him. Despite the fact that these two men shot and killed Arbery in February, they were not arrested until May 7th, 2 months after killing him. In March, a young lady, Breonna Taylor, was shot at least 8 times by plainclothes police officers exercising what's known as a no-knock warrant when they entered her home one night while she was sleeping. Taylor wasn't the person that police were looking for. The warrant on her house was actually in addition to a warrant that had been exercised earlier in the evening. Taylor was an innocent bystander. She wasn't the person the police were looking for. And then furthermore, the actions of the officers involved have received a great deal of criticism. And then finally, the spark that has set off the recent protests was the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who kneeled on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, even as Floyd gasped that he couldn't breathe and spit up blood. The event was captured on video, and in that video we see that 3 other officers helped detain Floyd or shield onlookers from helping him. Floyd lied motionless for nearly 3 minutes, and Chauvin even refused to stop his hold on Floyd. Even as medical staff attempted to treat Floyd. None of the officers on the scene attempted to revive Floyd. To all that have seen it, Floyd's murder at the hands of those police officers was the most egregious act of violence they have seen, and as the video was circulated, protests erupted across the United States. These protests have garnered widespread participation and support across the country, with participants demanding an end to racism, demanding justice for George Floyd, and reform of the criminal justice system in general. Many protesters will carry signs with names of other victims of police violence. They carry signs with the hashtag "I can't breathe," or chant slogans like "No justice, no peace," and "Black Lives Matter." Of course, the recent events that we just discussed are just another example of a long line of injustices against African Americans. As you all know, like a central theme in American history has been the systemic and institutional racism and mistreatment of black people. For the protesters, past and recent attempts to address the widespread problem have not gone far enough, and as a result, that frustration has boiled into violence at times. What you're looking at in these pictures is more historical context. These are images from 1960s civil rights demonstrations where black people demanded equality with everyone else in the United States. Part of the problem is that we still are having those sorts of protests almost 60 years later. And as a result, that frustration has boiled over into violence at times. We typically think of Martin Luther King Jr. as being the advocate for nonviolent and civil disobedience. But we can listen to him, even in this speech, explain and understand and explain why violence breaks out, why violence can happen in these situations.
Let me say, as I've always said, and I will always continue to say, that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. I'm still convinced that non-violence is the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for freedom and justice. I feel that violence will only create more social problems than they will solve, that in a real sense it is impractical for the Negro to even think of mounting a violent revolution in the United States. So I will continue to condemn riots and continue to say to my brothers and sisters that this is not the way. Continue to affirm that there is another way. But at the same time, it is as necessary for me to be as vigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities as it is for me to condemn riots. I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. What is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention.
I mean, what Martin Luther King Jr. is highlighting is something that you've learned in 7th grade, something that the United States was founded on. It's called the social contract theory. It was developed, or at least became widely popular during the Enlightenment in the 1700s and 1800s in France. And the basic idea is that citizens should follow a government's laws and they should respect its rules as so long as the government protects and serves their needs. For protesters, for black people in the United States governments, we're talking federal, national governments, state governments, and local governments, they haven't kept up that end of the social contract. And that's why there have been protests in the last week, and that's why sometimes they become violent. Now, of course, what I've explained to you today is just one part of this whole big thing. I really still want to hear what you guys think, your thoughts, your questions, your feelings, anything really. I want you to go to this Padlet. It's just a board where you guys can post things. I posted a few videos and a radio clip here to listen to or to watch that I think offer perspectives that I certainly didn't consider until I heard them. And that's an important part of this discussion, is to listen to what people have to say. I thought you might want to see those, but I also, more importantly, want you, so you can respond to these if you'd like, but I really just want you to post anything that you want. Your thoughts, your questions, your feelings, the things you agree with, the things you disagree with, other perspectives that you're aware of. Please post them here. It's totally anonymous. The only requisite, the only thing you have to do is be respectful of other people when they post on the board. With that, have a great weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday.